Welcome. Welcome to the Age of Organizational Effectiveness. This is the podcast that explores stories about organizations and their performance. I'm your host, Charles Chandler. Today, we're at episode number 131, and I'm calling it Change Your Organization. In this episode, I talk with Lindsey Agness, who's a change guru in the UK and has written several books on change. We discuss her book, Change Your Business with NLP. And I'm now joined by Lindsey Agness from the UK.
Hi, Charles.
Hey, Lindsey. This afternoon over there.
Yeah, lovely to be here. 2:00 in the afternoon in the UK.
Yeah, today we're going to talk about your book, your 2010 book, Change Your Business with NLP, Powerful Tools to Improve Your Organization's Performance and Get Results. There's a couple of things to unpack here. First, about change, and then the tool set for NLP. Okay. So, in your experience, why do organizations come to you when they need to change?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, Charles. I mean, I think there are many reasons, actually, but the most, I suppose, common reason that they would come to us is that because they're struggling with getting the people in their organization to do something differently, in terms of, and usually it's around a culture shift, a behavior shift, a mindset shift. So the organization may have a clear strategic direction for the future, and they need to shift a few things, but the staff are often lagging behind. The people side, they're often lagging behind. And they would come and speak with us at Change Corp about really helping them understand how could they start to take their people on a journey of change. And if you're familiar with the Kubler-Ross change curve, the leaders are usually quite a long way ahead of their people, on the change curve, and often they need some support, in helping their people shift through that. So I guess that's probably the most common reason why people would come and talk to us around the topic of change.
I think somewhere in your book you mentioned that organizations often come to you 6 months into a change program when things are not going quite so well. It's more difficult than they thought.
Yeah, that happens very often. Very often we might have a conversation with an organization and they're pretty we've got a client at the moment, actually, where we are doing some work, but they're very confident they can do the implementation themselves. And they'll often say, our HR department can help with that, can support that. And I think what the reality is, when they get into the implementation, then they start to realize that it's a lot more complex than they thought it was going to be. Often you get the HR department, and this is a bit of a universal, but often, they might say to people, this is how we need you to change. And then they get surprised when people don't change automatically, so they start struggling, and then they come to somebody like me to help them catch up, and help bring their people through.
Yeah, well, your book is about changing your business with NLP. And
yeah,
NLP is, I'm going to have to say it right, neuro-linguistic programming.
Yeah.
Yeah. So unpack those three words for us.
Yeah, definitely, Charles. In fact, it was created in the States originally in the early 70s. So it's been around now for about 50 years. But it's neuro-linguistic programming, and it is a bit of a mouthful, but it's really around, first of all, the neuro side is around how do people think, because we're never more than we think we can be, and so what goes on in our minds and what goes on in the mindset of a team or the mindset of an organization will drive ultimately how successful they are or not. So understanding neurologically what's going on is important. Linguistics is about what we say, and often you get metaphors in organizations in terms of the way they use their language, so you might be in one organization, they talk about, they're having battles and it's a struggle, whereas another organization, it could be, very easy and very straightforward. So the way people use language will often also drive, what they're thinking about and their ultimate behavior. And we can, shift a lot just by thinking about and supporting people in how they use their language. And then programming is really around what we do ultimately. And one of the inventors or creators of NLP, Richard Bandler, came from a computer programming background, which is where I think the word programming comes from. But it's really around our beliefs. What do we believe is possible? What do we believe we can do? What's our programming up until this moment that drives how successful we might be in future? And of course, an organization will have a set of beliefs about what's possible. It will have a history that drives the beliefs of what is possible. And every individual in that organization will have their own belief set about what they can do or can't do. So, simply we say it's around what we think, what we say, and what we do. And it's really around that model of excellence and really thinking about, how can we be the very best version of ourselves, or as a team or as an organization. So that was quite a long answer, but I hope that helps to explain what it's about. And I think it is a model that really helps in organizations because it does start to connect the kind of neuroscience with the behavior and with the outcome and the results.
Yeah, well, to put this in context, there's a lot of folks out there that are doing change management, not necessarily with NLP. But, how would you characterize the other folks that are coming to this world without NLP? I'm a member of the Academy of Management, and
right.
There's a group there for organizational development and change.
Yep.
And I think you would say that's from sociological background. Now, NLP comes out of perhaps a slightly different world, but can you give us a little context of how these things fit together?
Yeah, sure, Charles. And I kind of come from both worlds in a way, because when I first started my consulting career, I was taken on by PricewaterhouseCoopers, and so much of my earlier training was really around those more traditional change management models, which I absolutely agree have got an important role to play, and things like planning, stakeholder management, communications, learning and development, all of that good stuff is out there and absolutely valid. And it's work that I've done a lot of myself over the years. What I found quite interesting was when I started learning about NLP, which was in the late 1990s, so a while ago now, was to me, it kind of unlocked a piece that was always a mystery to me, which was, you could do all of the change management stuff, but you didn't necessarily still get the right outcome in the organization, or you didn't get as good as outcome as may have been possible. And I think that's because with NLP, it kind of gives you another layer. And that is really around understanding, what is going on in the behavior and mindset of this organization, and what can we learn about its history and its belief system, as I said, the way it uses language, all of those things that could really help enable this change to happen more effectively. So it's not that the other tools don't work. For me, it was almost like NLP unlocked a question that I'd always had in my mind, which was, how do we get to that result even faster? And how do we do that work with teams or with individuals that helps them understand, what they need to do themselves to get to where the organization, wants to go. So NLP to me was very results orientated, and it helped understand why, if you don't get into, if you like, the belief system then often the change will get stuck. It's a bit of a difference between, I might run a brilliant training course on, let's think of a topic, on presentation skills. I could deliver that and it would go pretty well. But if you've got people in the room that at the end of the day don't really believe they're ever going to be a good presenter, then that training course will only ever have a limited impact. So, NLP almost adds a layer which is around helping the organization build that confidence around getting the result that it wants to have. And also it's a bit like specifying what those shifts would be. So, to take that down to a very granular level, in terms of the behaviors, the mindset that would need to be evident in that organization to achieve what it needs to achieve. So I think it's, you can do it without NLP. Plenty of people do. I think it adds something to my practice that just helps move people and helps give them a greater understanding of what's required. So does that answer the question? That was quite a long answer to your question. But I think, having come from a background where I started as a change management consultant, that was my bread and butter at PwC. And then putting the NLP on top, I could really start to see the differences.
Yeah. Well, I always see management as a cognitive technology. It sort of asks us, where are we? How are we doing? Where do we go from here? Kinds of questions. I think what you're bringing to the table now is an NLP body of knowledge that informs some of that discussion. You're looking for patterns of language, I guess, for one thing, and knowing what's happening inside the organization based on the patterns of language that you're hearing, and their own self-assessment, and then moving from that.
And patterns of behavior. It's a bit like, in management, we talk about the iceberg, and you see there's bits you can see very easily above the water level, which might be, the policies and procedures of an organization, the reward and recognition, how they recruit, all that good stuff. Underneath the surface level is all that other stuff, which is around, the values, what's important to the organization, how do people behave, what do they believe is possible, as you said, Charles, how do they use their language. All of that is much less easy to get your arms around. So, having something like NLP just helps to do that analysis work and say really pinpoint where the organization might need to go, and to make sure, they've also got very clear goals in terms of the direction that they're moving into.
Yeah. Well, your book is divided into 4 parts. First is transforming leaders, then transforming teams, transforming organizations, and transforming customer service. There's a lot about transforming there.
Yes. There is. I mean, I suppose in terms of my own interests, I'm really interested in making big differences in individuals, teams, organizations, customer service. It's obviously you could make some small shifts, but I deliberately used the word transforming because I wanted the book to be very practical and give some practical toolkits that people could take away and start to work on. And so, the first part is really around how do I understand what I believe is possible for me, what's important for me, what kind of creature am I, where are my strengths, where are my areas for development, what is it that goes on in my head, in terms of my nervous system. And then with teams, it's really around, what makes a high performing team, and when we're working in organizations, how to use NLP in a change project to really, influence and guide people in a direction that you want them to go in. And customer service is really around, how do you transform the way that you build relationships and influence others? So it was a package. I felt as though I'd kind of downloaded everything that I'd learned over the years and packaged it in a way that I really wanted to make it easy for people to be able to pick up and be brave enough, confident enough to experiment with those tools for themselves and with their teams.
Yeah, I found a lot to like in the book. I was a bit of a skeptic, I think, going in.
Right.
But I didn't know anything
Yeah.
about NLP.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad, Charles. I'm glad that we managed to influence you a little bit.
No, I think it was a highly structured approach and a lot of detail there in a how-to sort of format. So if you get into the book, there's a lot of exercises and sort of cheat sheets you can use to design your own program. So I think, people will perhaps be surprised by the level of detail and the practicality once they get into it. Is that what you had in mind?
Yeah, definitely. I suppose I like to think, because of my background, that I come from a fairly logical, ordered place. But what's important to me is to have a book that I don't just read and I think, oh, that was interesting, and then it goes back on the shelf. I read a book and I'm motivated to do something, do something different. So I don't know, Charles, if there was anything in there that you felt, actually, I'm willing to give that a go. I'm going to take that away. Maybe something for yourself, the people that are around you. But that's always my outcome, is to give people enough detail. That's why there's quite a lot of detail in there, so that they have got the confidence to be able to take one of the questionnaires or one of the tools and have a go for themselves. Because books are only really, to me, and this is of course a non-fiction book, they're really useful when you get something that you can take away and use straight away. So they're I suppose they're the books I really enjoy, because I can go and use stuff, and so I try and write my books in the same kind of format.
As I mentioned, there is a bit of detail. There's things like the meta model and the Milton model and logical levels of change framework. It's easy to get bogged down into the weeds sometimes, but would you like to give us a little bit flavor of some of those aspects?
Yeah, definitely. So, the L in NLP is around linguistics, and when you start to learn NLP, and the kind of entry level, if you wanted to learn more, is practitioner training, and you can go and learn to be a practitioner at many schools and institutes, all over the world. But at practitioner level, we learn two models, and one is called the Milton Model and one is called the Meta Model. And I'll give you a flavour of both. So Milton is from the great hypnotist stroke change agent Milton Erickson, who sadly is no longer with us. But he used his language in a way that was artfully vague and very influential. So I'll give you an example. So he might say something, and it's really important that you have rapport with people, to be able to use this model, which is why in NLP we always talk about, it's really important to build a relationship, build rapport, because then, you can use language and people will accept it and be influenced by it. But it might be something like, we would call it a deliberate mind read. So, I could say to somebody, I know that you're going to learn something really useful from this podcast this afternoon. That's an example of a Milton Model mind read. It's plausible. We don't have the evidence, actually, that people are going to go, learn something really useful from this podcast. It is plausible. And of course, that is my intention, that they are going to learn something useful. But you can imagine when you're working with individuals or a team, to use mind reads in a very deliberate way can help build confidence, and build the interest and motivation of people. So something like that is an example of the Milton model. And there are about 9, that's one pattern, a mind read. There are like 19 different patterns. And we can use them to build motivation, confidence, and morale in a very deliberate way. On the other side of the coin, we've got the meta model, which was developed from a family therapist called Virginia Satir. And what Virginia Satir was very good at, she was very good at asking very structured questions to unlock people that were stuck, in their thinking. So an example of a meta model question would be something like, a team member might come up to you in a change project and they might say, well, they always think they're right, and they're quite cross about that. And what's interesting about that language, the constructive language, is who are they really talking about? And so often we might ask a meta model question, well, who specifically behaves like that? Which really, recovers who it is that's behaving in that way. And often it helps the individual to take back the responsibility for what might be going on. That somebody might come to you in a change project and say, oh, the leadership team, they make me so angry at the moment. And you might think, well, that's interesting. What is it that the leadership team is doing that's causing you to choose to feel angry? So, helping that person realize that actually it's not really the leadership team that's making them feel angry. It's how they interpret that particular incident or situation. And they can choose to not be angry as well. So we learn these two models in a very interesting way. So, we can use the Milton model to deliberately construct our language to help people feel confident, build their morale in a particular situation. Or we can use the meta model to ask very structured questions, which helps that person understand that it's not all about out there. It's actually what's going on in their heads that's important. So I'll just pause there for a second before I talk about the other model. But how does that help, Charles?
Yes, I think it does. Provides a little insight into some of those areas. Would you also like to focus on the logical levels of change framework?
Yeah, the logical levels of change. And that's really around this idea that I mentioned earlier, is that, you have many levels of change. And in an organization, you might see someone going in and operating at a level of skills development, for example. So they might go in and they might deliver a training program or a training project, but it doesn't necessarily deliver change, not for the long term. There might be some people on the training course that get quite a lot out of it. But probably after a few weeks, most people will have forgotten about the training anyway. Whereas what we like to do in NLP is think about, okay, how can we connect to this person's behavior and values, and ultimately at an identity level. So there's these kind of layers of the change conundrum, if you like, and every layer is a bit more intense and would help deliver a longer term change than the layer before. And ultimately at an identity level, it's kind of like, well, who are you? Who is this organization? It's a very different type of question to running a training course. And if I go back to that example I used earlier of running some presentation skills training, if people want to go and learn a skill, that's okay on one level. If it's really important to them, values level, they'll probably pay more attention. And ultimately, if they need to be able to deliver well for the organisation, they're probably going to pay more attention from a behavioural perspective. So, when you want long-term change in an organisation, it's really important to connect, especially into the values. So, what's important to that organisation and what's important to the people that work in that organisation have to be aligned on some level. If they're misaligned, then you're not likely to get the sustained long-term change that you need. So the levels are around, how do you build that model, working at a different level of intensity at every level of the model. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Because of the format of this podcast, we can't get in too much of the detail.
Yeah.
But certainly it's in the book, and I found it quite interesting. We're coming to the end of our time together, but is there something we have not talked about that you'd like to leave us with?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I also talk about in the book, which is quite simple, really, and yet I think people forget about it a lot of the time, is in NLP. We talked about NLP being the study of excellence, and one of the ways that through the years we've been able to deliver that is to hone this model of modeling that we call modeling, and in organizations, one of the things that I have done at times, which is a pretty simple thing to do, is to say, okay, who are the models of excellence in this organization? And that could be around model leaders, it could be around model salespeople, whatever it might be, and then deconstructing how do they achieve that excellence? What is it that they do, first of all? What are the strategies that they adopt? And very importantly, what's going on? What do they think and feel? What do they believe is important? What are their beliefs about themselves that enable them to be as successful as they are? So we kind of build this model up, which is not only about, how they might outwardly behave, it's also about what's their belief system and what's their thought process. Because, you can often learn some very interesting beliefs, and then you can teach that model to other people. And I've done that many times, around leadership. I've said, okay, I'll be delivering a leadership program, and I'll ask the group, I'll say, who's a great model of leadership in this organization? And they'll say, oh, this person. So we get them in, we get them into the course, and we interview them, and we create a model of what makes them, really excellent. And then, of course, through doing that, the other people on the training course can learn a lot from that individual, and then choose, to adapt and think about those beliefs, try those beliefs on for themselves and start to shift their behavior. So I think modeling in NLP has a lot to offer at all levels, of an organization. So that's something else, that I think is a very easy tool for people to take up and to use for themselves.
It's been great having you on the podcast today, Lindsey. How can people best connect with you and learn more about some of these areas?
Yeah, thanks, Charles. Well, my website is called thechangecorporation.com. That's all one word. You can go on there and find out more about what we do in the corporate world. Please email me, Lindsey, Lindsey, at thechangecorporation.com, and always delighted to engage in interesting conversations with people about NLP.
Excellent. Well, we'll have links to those in the show notes. So thanks very much for being with us today, Lindsey.
Yeah, thanks, Charles.
And that's about it for today. Join us again next time when we'll again consider stories about organizations and their performance. That's all for now. So long.